Not long after the shooting at the Centers for Disease Control on August 8th, Lauren Weber traveled there to talk to workers.
Even just standing on the street corner, you could see the bullet holes in a federal building, which is just a really striking visual.
Lauren is a health and science accountability reporter at The Washington Post. She'd just been to CDC headquarters in June, but after the shooting, the scene was strikingly different. In front of the bullet-scarred building, there was a makeshift memorial to David Rose, the police officer who'd been killed.
There were all these heartfelt messages written on it. I counted by Monday 60-something flowers left for him. And just some heartbreaking messages for his wife, his 2 children. His wife is pregnant with a 3rd child on the way. Just heartbreaking messages from CDC employees thanking him for keeping them safe, for his sacrifice. And many folks I spoke to were crying. I mean, They were devastated that this had happened, and they were also starting to become angry.
Angry at the Trump administration's response to the shooting, angry at the distrust of public health, and angry at the people who'd created that climate.
I think it's important for people to remember that this is happening after the coronavirus pandemic. And during the COVID pandemic, public health officials, both at the federal, state, and local level, were vilified.
Armed protesters would show up at public health meetings, even public health officials' homes.
This has been a long-running fear for folks that work at the CDC, that work in public health, that this anger from the pandemic would spill over into violence. And, this was kind of the culmination of those worries when a shooter, Patrick White, showed up to the CDC on August 8th and fired all these bullets at them.
In the aftermath of the shooting, HHS Secretary RFK Jr. posted a photo of himself fishing, and then he quickly posted a written message condemning the attack. And then a few days after that, he was back to essentially undermining the agency's coronavirus efforts. When you talk to employees, how did they reckon with that?
Employees are devastated. They feel like they do not have support from the top. They blame Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for spreading coronavirus misinformation, which, the shooter, police have revealed that the shooter believed he had been injured by the vaccine, and that, I spoke to a neighbor of the shooter who said he had a strong belief that authorities were covering up injuries from the vaccines and harm from the vaccine. And, it's worth remembering that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., before becoming HHS secretary, falsely called the COVID vaccine the deadliest vaccine ever made. He falsely said there was a poison in the COVID vaccine.
He even tweeted that the CDC was a cesspool of corruption.
So there is a lot of anger from these workers that Kennedy does not have their back. And when he posted those photos of him fishing, they felt like that was a further slap in the face.
Today on the show, why public health workers are asking other Americans, please don't move on from this shooting. It was a warning. I'm Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around.
Ford Blue Cruise hands-free highway driving takes the work out of being behind the wheel, allowing you to relax and reconnect, while also staying in control. Enjoy the drive in Blue Cruise-enabled vehicles like the F-150, Explorer, and Mustang Mach-E. Available feature on equipped vehicles. Terms apply. Does not replace safe driving. See Ford.com/BlueCruise for more details.
At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality walking shoes, which might lead to another discovery.
40,000 steps, baby! Who's on top now, Karen?
You've taken the office step challenge a step too far. Don't worry, though. Sierra also has yoga gear. It might be a good place to find your zen. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
So, to recap, on August 8th, a gunman fired over 500 bullets at the CDC campus in Atlanta, some 200 of which hit the building. It was almost 5 o'clock on a Friday, but hundreds of people were still at work. They ran and hid, barricading themselves into offices. It was almost 5 o'clock on a Friday, but hundreds of people were still at work. They ran and hid, barricading themselves inside offices. David Rose, the police officer who responded to the shooting, was killed. The man behind the attack was Patrick White from Kennesaw, Georgia, a city roughly an hour away.
It was just horrendously frightening. I mean, this is a man who his father had called the police multiple times about him having suicidal intentions. I spoke with neighbors of Patrick White who said that he had expressed concern about the COVID vaccine. One neighbor in particular told me that, and that other neighbors had told her a similar story. And he also comes from an interesting neighborhood. The city that he lives in, Kennesaw, that city actually has a law in the books that every household is required to own a gun. Now, that law is allegedly loosely enforced, but the fact that it even has a law that you're required to own a gun as a household is striking. It is also, that city is within the district of Marjorie Taylor Greene, a far-right congresswoman who also has said false things about COVID vaccine injuries and death. And it's a community that is still reeling from the fact that this neighbor who would mow the lawn and walk dogs, went and did this at CDC headquarters.
What do we know about the police officer who was killed in this shooting?
Oh gosh, it's pretty heartbreaking stuff. David Rose was a 33-year-old DeKalb County police officer who was killed in the shooting. He has a wife, 2 children, and his wife is pregnant with a third. And, this is a man who spoke at his police graduation from his police academy class in March and said, quote,
"From the very first day, we learned that policing isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about protecting the vulnerable, standing for justice, and being the person who runs towards danger when others run away."
And that is exactly what he did when he ran towards this massive shooting.
The attack dominated the news the day it happened, but not much more than that.
The lack of attention it's received has been really striking to CDC employees who feel like they're being overlooked here. As someone, they point out that if this had happened in DC, they feel like there'd be a lot more interest. If someone fired, 500 bullets at the White House or at a different federal agency, many CDC employees just feel like that would have gotten a lot more attention. And it's very striking, too, that the president, Donald Trump, has not said anything publicly about this.
Even as Washington, D.C. has been taken over by various National Guard troops.
Yes, it was a split screen. The Monday that he was announcing that, I was in CDC speaking to these folks who were just very struck by the differences in response.
I was really struck by a detail in one of your stories that one of the workers you talked to didn't put their child in daycare at the CDC because they were worried about something like this.
That daycare sits right outside the front gates of the CDC and was in the line of fire, but the shooter was aiming over it at the building, it appears. I think that speaks to these public health workers have been worried, not just since the shooting, but long before, about potential violence against them, as a result of some of the backlash we saw from the pandemic and in general. And I think that just speaks to the culture of fear that many public health workers live in these days, in the current state of political rhetoric against them and, the backlash you've seen online and just the divisions around public health work in this country these days.
I want to talk about conditions inside the CDC. The agency has been subject to reductions in force. Their work, as we've mentioned, has been called into question by multiple politicians, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr. himself. Even prior to this shooting, how did they feel about going to work in the morning?
Before they were shot at, morale was pretty low. You've had folks not only get fired and forced to leave, you've had just overall vitriol directed at the agency, as they say. You also had, return to work mandates. You had just a vilification, too, of some of the work they did on science. You had RFK Jr., before this shooting happened, had recently canceled contracts for mRNA vaccines. Morale was pretty low. And then this happened, and several of the CDC employees I spoke to when I was in Atlanta just said they don't know how they're going to go back to work. You already had people resigning in protest for some of Kennedy and HHS's actions. And I do think, from the folks we've talked to, they suspect that you're going to see more CDC and HHS employees depart because they're afraid. Some of them shared that they want to maybe take CDC stickers off their cars. The public health services, sometimes wear military uniforms to designate themselves as public health personnel. They're afraid to wear those uniforms. There's a real concern that there is a literal target on their backs after this shooting. And I think there is a real threat of more folks leaving the public health workforce after this.
Susan Monarez, the new head of the agency, had a meeting after the attack to kind of try to reassure the staffers. How did that go?
It did not go well. My colleague Lena Sun, who reported the story with me, and I heard from multiple CDC employees who felt like she really lost the room. I think to some extent they were expecting her to condemn more of the HHS secretary's remarks, and that's kind of a hard position to be in when he's your boss. But at the end of the day, they feel very not protected by her statements. They felt like it could have all been more forceful, and they're just really, really heartbroken and frustrated. I mean, these are people who feel like this police officer gave his life to support their work they're doing, and they feel like the management is not supporting the work that they're doing. And it's truly, a lot of the folks I talk to, they're like, look, I could get a job in the private sector that would pay me more money. I do this in part as I see that it's important, but this is a whole different era that they're living in. And it's really striking to hear just the almost anguish in many of their voices when they talk about this.
Is this the last straw for them?
I think for some, you may see more people departing. It's interesting. There were more folks some folks obviously were not willing to speak to us on the record, but some were. And I think that shows that you're seeing kind of a breaking point where people feel like there needs to be a change here. And even on Wednesday, we saw that more than 750 current and former state of HHS, which includes the CDC and NIH, have signed a letter to RFK Jr. and members of Congress accusing RFK Jr. of endangering the lives of employees and the American people and calling for a change about that. And so we'll see what that kind of momentum has or doesn't have, but these are employees that are very, very, very distraught.
When we come back, the fear inside the public health world that this attack is just the beginning.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply.
This podcast is brought to you by Smalls. Is your cat ready for a diet upgrade? Then you need Smalls cat food, named the best overall cat food by Cats.com. Smalls cat food is packed with protein and made with preservative-free ingredients, giving your cat the high-quality meal they deserve. And it's delivered right to your door. After switching to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported noticeable improvements in their cat's overall health. Plus, Smalls has donated over $1 million worth of food to help cats through Humane World for Animals, so you can feel good about every purchase. The team at Smalls is so confident your cat will love their product, you can try it completely risk-free. Give your cat the food they deserve. For a limited time only, because you are a What Next TBD listener, you can get 60% off your first Smalls order plus free shipping by using code TBD. That's 60% off when you head to smalls.com and use promo code TBD. Again, that's promo code TBD for 60% off your first order plus free shipping at smalls.com.
I'm Ashley Graham, and as a parent, I know the back-to-school transition can be a lot. When it comes to wellness, Ollie supports me and my family through it all. Kids Multi is big in my house. It supports their immune system, and they love to take it. A win-win for everyone. Shop these products at ollie.com or retailers nationwide. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
You know, I remember the attacks against abortion providers in the 80s and 90s, and I wonder, when we look at the anti-vaccine movement, if there is a parallel here, because it's very hard not to think about how those things feel like echoes of one another.
That's a fascinating comparison, and I do think there is some politicization that's happened around the vaccine movement that mirrors some of that. But I mean, I want to be clear that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., despite staffers' frustration with him, for initially posting and continuing to post photos about fish and workouts, did very clearly condemn violence, invoking his own family and how political violence is unacceptable.
They work in silence and saving us all and protecting our health. And they should not be the targets of this kind of violence from anybody. I come from a family that lost 2 of its members to political violence, and it's always wrong. And we need to make, part of my job is to make sure that we protect our employees and keep them safe and allow them to do their critical work.
He also went on, a TV program, Scripps News, on the Monday after the shooting and said, after saying he condemns violence and saluting the gold star work of CDC employees, went on to say that they had not been honest during the pandemic.
We have to ask, why are people not believing the public health agencies? And the answer, I think, is pretty elementary. That the public health agencies have not been honest.
And talked more about vaccine injuries, raising questions. And so there is this frustration for many CDC and science communicators and HHS employees that he is working in opposition to quelling the very misinformation that they feel like he has spread in the past. And the real question is how will that continue to play out for the American healthcare system? And how will that work with a federal agency whose job is to present research and facts about disease? But that research and facts is being challenged by the people at the top of the agency itself.
I mean, on Tuesday, the American Academy of Pediatrics broke with the government for the first time in 30 years, essentially saying, we think you should vaccinate your children against COVID-19, children ages 6 months to 2 years. And that is such a striking thing to see, that distance between really the pediatric community and the public health community.
Well, it's been a long time coming. I mean, since Kennedy came into office, once he's made several moves that public health experts are really alarmed that chip away at the vaccine bedrock to public health for the U.S. people. He fired the entire Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which is an outside body that advises the CDC, and replaced them with handpicked folks who many in the scientific community feel like were not of the same credential level as the folks that he had gotten rid of. And they announced in their first meeting, which was the last time I was in Atlanta looking at the CDC building and inside it, they announced at that meeting they're going to reevaluate the childhood immunization schedule, which has been a long time goal of Kennedy's. I mean, Kennedy, before becoming secretary, has repeatedly falsely linked vaccines to autism and said a variety of statements that are untrue about vaccination. I mean, he has a history as an anti-vaccine activist, and there is a lot of concern about what that means for how the public health apparatus will change and move going forward.
I'm thinking back to the image that you painted at the top of this conversation of, bullet holes in the walls of the CDC, and also these conversations you had with staffers there who are so shaken. If employees start leaving the agency in even larger numbers than we've seen, what does the general public lose when that knowledge and that commitment walks out the door?
It's hard to really quantify that. I mean, and it's hard to even tell based on what we've had so far. It's kind of one of those things where we'll see the results of it in the years to come. But we have already seen the departure of top virologists, of folks focused on tobacco cessation campaigns, on other public health measures that often go unseen by the American public, but have tremendous effects in trying to keep them safer and healthier. And there is a real concern from the public health experts that I speak to that losses could be immeasurable, and that this could be a real brain drain, too, of talent, because they are afraid to work for an agency like this.
There have been people who have made the connection between the shooting at the CDC and the January 6th attack on the Capitol, that this could be a catalyst for more political violence against public health agencies, unless there is a more forceful denunciation from people in charge. And I guess I wonder, when you spoke to people at the CDC, when you do your reporting on this, how much worry is there that political violence, especially against the public health community, becomes more and more frequent?
I spoke to a CDC worker who was visiting the memorial for the fallen officer on Sunday, who was really choked up. And she told me she had left the office, I think, less than an hour before the shooting began. But even the day before, she had thought about sitting there just at her desk on a normal day, on a Thursday. She had thought about how she could fit behind filing cabinets to protect herself because she was so worried about something like this happening. And she told me, look, this has been a long time in the making. It was a long time coming. And she went on to say she doesn't know why it wouldn't happen again. She feels like the fact that it's already happened once, there's nothing else to stop it from coming again. And that's one of the main fears she and other employees have coming back to the building. And I think there's just a lot of fear among CDC and public health officials that this was really an opening salvo of some extent. I mean, this actual shooting at what is seen as kind of the beacon of American public health, the headquarters of American health, is something entirely different. And I think there's just a lot of fear that this could potentially get worse. And people, I think, are also really angry that they feel like there hasn't been the attention given to this. The folks I've spoken to in Atlanta just really are shocked that despite this horrible thing that they were afraid of happening for so many years happening, they feel like it really didn't get the coverage or denunciation or attention it deserved from the folks that are in charge of leading and protecting them.
Lauren Weber, thank you so much for your reporting and for talking with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Lauren Weber covers health and science accountability at The Washington Post and focuses on the forces behind medical misinformation. All right, that is it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell, Patrick Fort, and Shayna Roth. Our show is edited by Elena Schwartz. Mia Lobel is the executive producer at Slate, and TBD is part of the larger What Next family. And if you're looking for even more Slate podcasts to listen to, check out today's episode of The Discourse. That's our show for Slate Plus subscribers. It's about why Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg are paying thousands of dollars for high-tech mattress toppers to track their sleep, and why the company that makes them wants you to buy one too. All right, we'll be back on Sunday with another episode. I'm Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks for listening.